in their own country. Chapter 7 then was on colonialism and the colonial policies of illegal occupation. The overview here is twofold. Firstly, historically there are several occupation practices, and secondly, most of these practices still occur. Those are the two things you have to keep in mind when you listen to this chapter. Firstly then, on military occupation. There's three main things I want to highlight here. Firstly, on unequal resource distribution. These resources that are being distributed, and namely a lot of these resources are being distributed from humanitarian organizations, are actively being taken by the Israeli forces, and being taken by the Israeli people, and then being resold and used for profit. Secondly, that profit is then used to be complicit in the abuse against the Palestinian people. Secondly, the limitations to mobility. I mentioned this before. The military checkpoints are instituted. These military checkpoints are vicious. It means that you cannot leave the street of your house without being talked to by an Israeli soldier, being asked where you're going, why you're going, and this inherently limits the amount of freedom that the Palestinian people have to move. It then means that they also need permits to do things like travel within your own country. Imagine if you're going to Kananaskis one day, and they tell you, no, you have to pay $50 and get this big permit just to go through the land. I tell you then that is incredibly inhumane. The third part of this is the unlawful attacks and killings that have been occurring onto the Palestinian population. There's completely arbitrary arrest numbers and attacks during peaceful protests, especially done by the Israeli forces. These Israeli forces also do things like harm children and civilians who are consistently and almost always innocent. They do it anyways. The second part of this military occupation then, I want to highlight two more things. The first one is on the detainment and treatment of Palestinian people. I want to note here that the military forces, when they don't agree with what you said at a checkpoint, when they believe that you're being unsure or unhonest, or even when you're just participating in a peaceful protest, they take you and they detain you. In detainment, you get abused, you get hurt, especially children, women, they get sexually abused, sexually assaulted, and there's nothing that you can do about it because it's another country's military that is actively perpetuating these acts on you. And secondly on this is the night raids. I want to note this is where a lot of the detainment of children actually occurs. So they're arrested in various circumstances. Most of these circumstances are often going to be innocent. They're just children, and then there's extensive force exerted across them, where they're being forced to be strip searched, where they have police-based harm, where the police come and harm them, and they can't do anything about it because the police are in a position of authority over them, where they're being strip searched consistently just for the guards' pleasures. We tell you that all of that is incredibly inhumane and incorrect. The next part of this, then, is the use of illegal force. I want to note here, the most important part of this is the use of uranium. And along with uranium, they use things like live ammunition, which actively hurts people on the ground. They go out into crowds in peaceful protests, and they shoot their gun wherever they can, and they hit a bunch of citizens, and those citizens all die. But the problem is that Israel has access to things like uranium, which they get from other countries in the Middle East that have these nuclear weapons. Uranium then, whenever it's used, has lasting effects on the citizens that it's used on. So if we look at places like Japan, which had the Nagasaki, Hiroshima bomb dropped on them, there were 30 years and even more than that of impending circumstances that included that. So things like birth defects occur when you're exposed to so much radiation. It's the same reason why when you're at a dentist's office, you have to wear a little lead vest before they even take your x-ray, because that amount of radiation can be bad for you. We tell you that this intense amount of radiation then actively ruins the lives of Palestinians for years to go on. But also notably, it hurts their environment as well. So when they have land that is palatable, that they're able to use for their crops and to gain their own generational wealth, that land is destroyed when it is inhibited by radioactive materials. That's even worse, and that radioactive waste disposal actively harms the lands that they own, the lands that they cultivate on, the lands that they call home. Great. They tally these by the numbers then. I'm sure you can read up there exactly what we're looking at. But the thing I just want to highlight to you is the problem is not the citizens of Israel. So the problem is not the Jewish people who are perpetuating these acts. The problem is the state of Israel, who uses anti-Islamic rhetoric and pro-Jewish rhetoric to then hurt the people who live in Palestine. So it's almost always the Israeli Defense Forces that are perpetuating these acts. We tell you that that's why the numbers on the screen are 10,000 to only 100. That is an incredible disparity, and it shows you that it's not only the Jewish people that are complicit in this abuse, but it's the entire state of Israel that does this. Excellent. I want to chat about US aid then. I think US aid then is often used nowadays to help perpetuate the colonialism. How does this happen? And I'm sure that you guys are thinking, oh, if the US is a democratic actor, why would they do things to hurt people in other countries? We tell you that the US sends places like Israel financial aid. It has sent over $3.8 billion, with $3.3 billion of those dollars being used for military action. If you put that into perspective, it's like every single citizen of the world giving 50 cents towards Israel's abuse of Palestinians. We tell you that that is morally and actually incorrect. We think that that money then helps oppress the Palestinians when they're able to use that $3.3 billion to create more bombs, to get more soldiers, to do more training, to buy more ammunition, to create more uranium, and to continue perpetuating this abuse. On the expansion of colonialism then, the reason that colonialism is still being expanded is often because of financial incentives. And so since actors are actively they're wanting to support Israel, because they're giving money to that, they're continuing the expansion of Israel to Palestine. We tell you that even giving this money from the US to Israel is an incredibly incorrect act. Excellent. My last chapter then is on chapter 8 on the Israeli Defense Forces. I'm going to go more in depth into what these forces are actually doing and why it is firstly the responsibility of these forces that is causing the consistent harm of the Palestinian people. Excellent.